One of the most unhelpful things that we do in hypnosis is use the words imagine and visualize as though they mean exactly the same thing. And they do not. Imagination's a broad psychological capacity, and visualization is just one way of using it. Yet many hypnosis sessions seem to assume that everybody has a fully operational cinema inside their head. See the staircase, picture the beach, notice the color of the sky, watch the numbers disappear, see your future confident self striding magnificently towards you. And if you cannot produce this internal blockbuster in glorious high definition, you may start wondering whether you're doing hypnosis incorrectly. You are probably not. Visual instructions can work extremely well for people who naturally experience vivid mental pictures. There's nothing inherently wrong with inviting somebody to imagine a beach, a forest, or the world's most therapeutically significant staircase. The problem begins when visual imagery is treated as compulsory and when somebody's inability to see something clearly is interpreted as a failure of imagination. Um, Psychological research shows substantial individual differences in mental imagery. Some people experience pictures almost as vividly as perception. Others report faint, fleeting, or incomplete images, and some experience little or no voluntary visual imagery at all, a phenomenon commonly described as aphantasia. But imagination is not simply internal vision. You might imagine through physical sensation. You might use inner speech, sound, movement, emotion, memory, or spatial awareness. You might understand the meaning of an idea without experiencing anything remotely picture-like. For example, you could think about the layout of your kitchen without necessarily seeing a photograph of it inside of your head. You can know what confidence means to you without watching a miniature confident version of yourself marching across an internal screen. You can anticipate the comfort of getting into bed without producing a cinematic close-up of the duvet. Although I sincerely hope the duvet has an agent if you do. The important distinction here is between representing an experience and picturing it. Suppose I invite you to imagine standing beside a tranquil lake. One person may see the water, trees, and reflection in exquisite detail. Another may sense openness and stillness. Someone else may imagine the sound of water. Another person maybe remembers how it feels to be somewhere peaceful. Someone may simply think, yes, I understand, tranquil lake. And of course, your mind may provide a verbal description, like narration, of something resembling a slightly damp car park. We can still work with it. The question is not, did you see exactly what I wanted you to see? The better question is, did that way of imagining help you become meaningfully involved with the suggestion? That matters because visual imagery or vivid imagery is not automatically useful imagery. You could vividly imagine 17 flamingos performing river dance in your kitchen. Which would be awesome, right? It would be impressive, but unless we're treating a very unusual problem, it may not move the session forward. What matters is whether an imagined experience is relevant to the intended response. If the suggestion concerns physical comfort, perhaps imagined warmth, softness, or muscular release will be more useful than producing a detailed picture. If it concerns confidence, you might use posture, inner speech, remembered competence, emotional tone, or the sense of moving purposefully. If it concerns motivation, you might connect with reasons, consequences, actions, and anticipation rather than trying to see success as though were waiting patiently beside a pot of gold. And this is why I encourage people that are learning self-hypnosis or listening to one of my hypnosis audio tracks to translate instructions. If I were to say, see yourself responding calmly, and you do not experience mental pictures, you don't have to strain until your forehead develops its own postcode. Instead, ask yourself, how would I know if I was responding calmly? How might calmness feel in my body? What would I say to myself? How would I breathe, move, behave? What would become easier? What useful idea could I become absorbed in? That's not avoiding the exercise. It's adapting the exercise so that your mind can anticipate, can participate effectively in the process, in the suggestions. And this principle influences the way I teach self-hypnosis and the way I write and record audio programs. We want to offer enough direction to engage attention and imagination while leaving room for the listener, the respondent, to you know to discover a personally meaningful strategy. And that also influences how I teach students here at my college. A competent hypnotherapist doesn't merely deliver instructions. They observe, ask questions, listen to the client's language and adapt their communication. They almost coach them to become a better responder. And if a client says, I cannot see anything, repeating, well, see it more vividly, with added theatrical emphasis, is not individualized therapy. It's the psychological equivalent of speaking louder to someone who doesn't understand the language. Perhaps that client responds more readily to sensation. Perhaps they think verbally. Perhaps they engage through memories, through movement, through metaphor, emotion, or conceptual understanding. The, the therapist's job is not to force every client through the same imaginary doorway. It's to discover which doors the client can actually use. And that's why, perhaps a hypnosis script should be treated as tools rather than commandments. A script can provide structure, utility. It can remind a practitioner of useful themes, help them to adhere to an evidence-based process, carefully considered language. But a script cannot listen and respond to the client. It cannot notice confusion or hesitation, interest, or an unexpected response. The practitioner has to do that. Responsive communication, that's central to good hypnotherapy because the client's not a passive recipient. They're interpreting the instructions. They are selecting meanings. They're generating experiences and responding in their own way. And the same is true when you're practicing self-hypnosis, when you're self-regulating, self-directing an experience. You're not waiting for somebody else's words to operate your imagination on your behalf. You're learning how to direct your own attention, how to manage it, how to use your own cognitive resources more skillfully. So if you've ever thought, I cannot visualize, therefore hypnosis will not work for me, I would encourage you to reconsider the assumption because you do not need a better mental picture. Perhaps you need a different route into the experience. The goal is not to make your imagination resemble mine or anybody else's. The goal is to identify how your mind can become meaningfully involved with a useful hypnotic suggestion. If you'd like to learn more, explore my research-informed self-hypnosis teaching, audio programs, and if you're considering becoming a professional hypnotherapist, individualized strategy and responsive communication, those things are central to the way we train practitioners here at the Anglo-European College. Good hypnosis is not about making every mind follow the same script. It's about learning how to work intelligently with the mind that is actually in front of you.